Hello everyone, welcome to another wonderful week here on moral psychology. In this video, I'm going to be talking about desire. So we've wrapped up our section on emotions and now we'll move into this new section. We should be looking at these theories here. The motivational theory of desire, the hedonic theory, the evaluative theory, and a learning-based theory. Now, of course, we can't look at all the varieties of theories that are under these different types, but we'll look at a representative from each one of them. Before we get into the motivational theory for today, it's important to get some terms straight that you'll be seeing in the reading. The first one that you'll be seeing is intrinsic desire. And intrinsic desire is just that which you're actually wanting. An instrumental desire is something that you want in order to get the intrinsic desire. Let me give you an example. So imagine that you want a cup of coffee. You get the cup of coffee, you drink it. It turns out you're not really satisfied for some reason. You're not satisfied perhaps because it turns out the coffee was decaf. So what you really wanted was the buzz the caffeine would give you as opposed to the coffee itself. But it was true that you did want the coffee. The coffee is the instrumental desire. The intrinsic desire is the buzz that the caffeine would give you. So oftentimes desires do have this twofold kind of structure to them, where there's an object desire, like a desire for an object, and then there's something else. There's like the intrinsic desire, which is oftentimes embedded, it seems, as if in the object desire. Now, sometimes I'll call these things root desires, the intrinsic desires, and a root desire would be something that would be that which you're ultimately seeking in that object. For example, the pleasure of the buzz from the coffee. So if I got the coffee, that would be my object desire, my instrumental desire. And the intrinsic desire or the root desire then would be the buzz, the pleasure that you're looking for. There's also these things called standing desires and occurrent desires. A standing desire you'll see explained in more detail in Ecker and Doring's paper. The standing desire is are those desires which function in your life, but you're not noticing them immediately. You have a desire most likely to live a healthy and long life, but you might not be thinking about that all the time. So those would be your standing desires. You have a desire to live a long and healthy life. But it's not like you have to entertain that consciously in order to have that desire. But when you do entertain that desire, when you do have the feeling that you want something, that's what we call an occurrent desire. The occurrent desire, say, for a cup of coffee, right? If you're thinking about coffee and it seems appealing to you, you would like one, then that's an occurrent desire. It's possible you had a standing desire for all sorts of things, but you might not know what they are, right, until you have a current case of it. So this happens a lot. Oftentimes, though, when you recognize what your standing desires are, you do so not through an occurrent desire, but through a judgment about what you actually want in your life in general. With these terms in mind, then let's go ahead and turn to our first motivational theory of desire. And this is a little bit more just background. And what we're going to look at here is Tim Schroeder's partial exposition of the motivational theory in his book, The Three Phases of Desire. So that's what the content we'll be drawing from will be from that at first. And then after we get through some of Schroeder's work, or content rather, then we'll move on to Eckert and Doring. So here's a couple. What is a motivational theory of desire? To understand why there's different theories of desire, it might be helpful to get the idea, to understand the idea that why we need a theory of desire. So desires, we all have them, right? We all want different things. But it's hard to define what a desire is, and it's hard to express, to talk about what they do in our lives and in our psychological frame, in our psychology, with any sort of detail without being circular or given trivial types of answers and explanations. So you need a theory of desire that isn't circular, isn't trivial, and isn't totally alien to try to make sense of what a desire is if you want to have some sort of general theory of desire. The first theory of desire that we're looking at is a motivational theory. And what it's talking about are wants, right? So if I say, what is a desire? You say, well, it's wanting something. Well, that's good, but it's a good first step. But wanting is just desiring. It's the same thing in this context. If I want something, I desire that thing. If I desire that thing, I want that thing. The desire and the wanting are the same thing for our purposes. So to say that I wanting is the same as desiring is just to say wanting is the same thing as wanting, or desiring is the same thing as desiring. We need to have some sort of theory that accounts for what wanting is. Motivational theory says that wanting is a disposition to act in certain ways. So Michael Smith argues that a desire that P tends to endure, disposing the subject in that state to bring about that P. So what does that mean, right? So if I want something, then I want a state of affairs to occur in the world. I want the world to be a particular kind of way. For example, I want a cup of coffee. So if I desire that I have a cup of coffee, then I'm disposed to act in such a way to bring it about that I have a cup of coffee. So I'll do things like go to the coffee shop, bring my wallet around with me, think about getting coffee, talk about getting coffee, stuff like that. Robert Stalnecker, in his book called Inquiry, says, to desire that P is to be disposed to act in ways that would tend to bring it about, that P, in a world in which one's beliefs, whatever they are, were true. So if I want coffee, then I'll be disposed to act in particular ways that tend to bring it about that I'll get coffee in a world where my beliefs about getting it are true, right? Because I'm going to act according to my beliefs. So, for example, if I want coffee and I believe that I could leave my office and go and to the coffee shop and buy a cup of coffee, then I will be disposed to doing those kinds of things, right? And if my beliefs are true, then I will be disposed to bring it about that I'll get a cup of coffee. If my beliefs are false, on the other hand, then this belief won't help me, it won't enable me to bring it about that I get the cup of coffee. But nevertheless, the motivational theory states that to desire something is to be disposed, to tend rather, to act in particular ways that will usually bring it about that I achieve what I want, that I'll get what I want. So here we have the standard theory, the first versions. Standard theory number one. To desire that P is to be disposed to bring it about that P. So for the motivational theory, it's important to note that there's two essential features. One is that it entails a proposition, that P, which really is saying you can't desire objects, you have to desire states of affairs in the world. So you can't desire sex or an apple or a person or peace. You have to desire to have sex or to eat an apple or that Darren falls in love with you or that all wars cease on earth. So you have to, it's not as if you can desire a person, which I'm not sure what that would mean exactly. You have to desire that you engage with the person or that you're talking to the person or that the person's with you. So that's a state of affairs, a set of events in the world. The other additional feature to desire, according to Schroeder, is that desires are action guiding. So you have desires are propositional attitudes and desires are action guiding. Desires play all sorts of causal roles, but there's just one role definitive of desire, and it's engaging the mental machinery in such a way as to tend to bring it about that P for the P that is the content of the desire. All this means is that desires are disposing you to act in particular ways as to bring it about to achieve the object that you want, right? To gain the object you want, or to create the world, to make the world be a particular way. So there's another feature that you'll see come up in the readings, and it's called the direction of fit. The direction of fit for desire is a mind to world fit, as opposed to belief it's a world to mind fit. So what this means is that when you desire something, you want the world to be the way you want it to be, right? You want the world to be a particular way. You want the world to match your beliefs, or sorry, your desires. The world to match your desires. With beliefs, though, you want your beliefs to match the world, right? So this is different. You want in desires, you want the world to match your desires, but in your beliefs, you want your beliefs to match the world. Motivational theory of desire states that the way what this means for this direction of fit is to cause the world to be the way you want it to be. And so if you want something, then you're disposed to acting a particular way that will bring about what you want. And that's what a desire is, according to this view. Beliefs alone, they want to claim, do not cause you to act. So I can believe all day that I want to stay dry and that it's raining, and that umbrellas will keep me dry. I can have all these beliefs, but what causes me to put the umbrella over my head as I leave is this desire to stay dry. So um, I can believe that it's raining outside. I can believe that the umbrella keep me warm, or sorry, dry. But unless I have the desire to stay dry, then I'm unable to explain why I did that, according to this view. And of course, there's more sophisticated explanations of action here, but this is just one way of understanding that. So sometimes you have competing desires. I'll want something and I'll want something that is against it, right? So I want to stay thin, but I also want to eat ice cream at night. So you have stronger and weaker desires according to some views, some constructions of this theory. The stronger view, the view says that, well, what does it mean for something to be a stronger desire or weaker desire? For something to be a stronger desire means that you're more disposed to acting that way in general states of in general situations. So if I prefer to be thin, then I will be more disposed to doing things that I believe are congenial to staying thin. But I also do like to eat ice cream at night. So if I see there's a conflict there and I desire to stay thin more than I desire to eat ice cream, then I'll be more disposed to not eating ice cream at night. And so that's how it works. So it always would reduce to this disposition to bring about a certain state of affairs in the world. It does seem to be the case that when my desires are fulfilled, that I have a certain amount of pleasure in that. I have some sort of level of satisfaction, and my desires being fulfilled. But a motivational theorist is going to say that this is not essential to the theory. There is pleasure connected to desire, of course, and there's causal relations to pleasure and satisfaction of desire, but this isn't essential at all. Right? You can remove the pleasure from the desire, and you can still have the desire, just so long as you're disposed to act in a particular way to bring about the state of affairs that's the object of your desire. Then you are said to have desire. You don't even need to be conscious in order to have the desire. So pleasure and displeasure are just a portion of the total contribution desire make to consciousness on a standard theory, but they aren't required at all. Because desires don't need to appear in consciousness at all. And I mean, this just seems to be commonsensical to a certain extent. My standing desires, I'm not conscious of them, but it still makes sense to say I have them even when I'm not conscious. right? Like I want to have a long and healthy life, and that's true of me even when I'm asleep, but I'm not entertaining that desire. So that would be an example of a standing desires. These desires then don't depend on your consciousness at all for the motivational theory, because the motivational theory is just a disposition to behave in a particular way. It's it's if these conditions arise, then I'm disposed to acting that way. It's not a case of it's not a case of consciously entertaining the thought that I want a cup of coffee. It's that if I want a cup of coffee, then I'm disposed to doing something to bringing it about that I get a cup of coffee. Okay, so that's all we have from Schroeder in this lesson. So let's kind of move on now to Eckert and Doring. So Eckert and Doring uh, is just one ways the motivational theory is argued for. There are some other readings that I would suggest if you're interested in getting more of a robust treatment of the standard model, and that would be Michael Smith's book. I think it's called Moral Questions, and he has a paper also it's in that book. But there's also an essay called The Humean Theory of Motivation, and that's a good book too. That a good essay and good chapter that articulates this view. You could also look at Robert Stalnaker's book Inquiry in a chapter on beliefs. I think it's like the first chapter. He has an exposition on desire as well from a motivational position. And David Wall also has a paper on the motivational theory that I think is good. Okay, so what do Eckert and Doring say? Eckert and Doring say that there's these standing desires, and standing desires are just what we kind of talked about before: desire to live a long and healthy life. You can have these desire when you're not conscious, but they do tend to make it that you act a particular way. So if I have a standing desire to live a long and healthy life, I'll tend to do things that will enable that to be true, just so long as there's not an overriding desire that limits my ability to act in a way, in ways that will bring that about. So if I have a standing desire to live a long and healthy life, I'll probably have a fairly healthy lifestyle, and just so long as my desire for pleasure or something like this isn't overriding. So they say that the core idea behind dispositionalism is that is about these standing desires rather in fact you know how to I'm talking over myself here. So what Eckert and Doran want to claim is that usually you're not aware of your standing desires, like we said before. These standing when you are aware of them, they typically take the form of a judgment. I am aware of that I want a cup of coffee, right? Oh, I judge that I want to live that long healthy life, of course. So someone asks you, for example, do you want to live a long healthy life? You're like, yeah, of course. And so then that's when you typically recognize your standing desires. But overall, the general structure is just what I said before. Your standing desires are usually describable in some sort of causal profile that talks about what kind of behaviors you'll have if you actually have that standing desire. Current desires are different. They're phenomenally conscious desires. It's like I want a cup of coffee, and then I realize I want a cup of coffee, so I go and get it. It's when I have that. It's that the conscious episode of desiring. I want a soda right now, right? So that's different. That's different than a standing desire. So you can see how Eckert and Doring is a model of the motivational theory, even though they actually explicitly deny the fact. I think it's pretty clear that they are quite a good example of a motivational theory. They say desiring that P necessarily involves an inclination to act in ways that one takes to be conducive to realization of P. So this sounds a lot like Stalnaker and Smith's example, who are like the archetypes or the paradigms of the motivational theory. And Eckert and Doring have a couple, three features that you need to be aware of. So they come D1 through D3. So here's the first one. This is the one of the essential elements of a desire, and this is a necessary condition they claim. They say necessarily for any agent A, any proposition P, at any time T, and any act type phi, if at T A desires that P, then A is disposed at T to phi in circumstances A, where circumstances where A takes her phi to be conducive to P's being the case. So let me translate this for you, okay? So what they're saying is that at 1 o'clock, if I want a cup of coffee, then I'm going to be disposed at 1 o'clock to do certain things that will bring it about that I will go and get a cup of coffee. So phi will be things like getting my wallet and walking to the coffee shop. So let me read this way. If at 1 o'clock I have a desire for a cup of coffee, then I'm disposed to do at 1 o'clock to pick up my wallet and walk over to the coffee shop. And why? Because I take getting while walking to the coffee shop to be conducive to getting the cup of coffee. And so D1 is one of the necessary conditions for having a desire, they think. If you have a desire, then you're going to be disposed to acting in a particular way when you think acting in that way is conducive to bringing about your desired object. D1 isn't a sufficient condition, it's a necessary condition. So if you have a desire, then you have D1. So it's important to note that because they're not claiming it's a sufficient condition. They're not saying this is good enough to guarantee that you have a desire. They're saying this is actually required for a desire. So any act type phi in D1, it doesn't necessarily refer just to bodily actions. It could also refer to some things like speech acts, talking about um, that you want particular things, or talking about how something is good, or mental events, entertaining the idea that you're going to get it, planning, stuff like that. So Schroeder doesn't not think the motivational theory is a good theory to hold, and he thinks that he can provide some sort of objection. So one of the objections that Ecker and Doring bring up that Schroeder talks about is this one about Pythagoras. He says, imagine there's a mathematician, Pythagoras, who does not know the value of pi, but allegedly has a strong desire that it turns out to be an irrational number, which it already is. There is nothing Pythagoras can do to determine the value of pi, and he himself does not believe there is. So he has the desire despite not being disposed to do anything, or so the argument may seem. So here it seems that Pythagoras has a desire, but isn't disposed to do anything to bring it about to have the desire. So it doesn't seem as if it is a necessary condition. So if this is possible, then they seem to be wrong. Another objection to D1 is from Galen Strawson, who we'll be looking at pretty soon as well. And this is a famous case of the Weather Watchers. So the Weather Watchers are a race of sentient, intelligent creatures. They are distributed about the surface of their planet, rooted to the ground, profoundly interested in local weather. They have sensations, thoughts, and emotions, beliefs, and desires. They possess a conception of an objective spatial world, but they are constitutionally incapable of any sort of behavior. They lack the necessary physiology. Their mental lives have no other observable effects. They are not even disposed to behave in any way. And this comes from Strawson's book, 1994, which we'll be reading pretty soon. So the Weather Watchers are incapable of performing any mental acts, although they are. The Weather Watchers are incapable of performing any mental acts, although they are passive. They can passively experience many sorts of mental episodes. They cannot actively initiate them, however. They also are under no illusion that they can change the weather. So Strawson claims that these beings have desires that the weather be this way or that way, although they are not disposed to act in any particular way. So what is Ecker and Doring's reply to Schroeder and Strawson? They claim that neither Pythagoras nor the weather watchers, as described originally, have the relevant desires. The important point is that this is not so because they fail D1. So they don't meet the conditions that D1 sets out. They can have the relevant dispositions, but it is still wrong to say that they have the relevant desires. Here isn't that they are unable to act. What is really important, they think, is that for any type of action possible, if Pythagoras is now disposed to performing an action in a particular set of circumstances. And these circumstances would be those circumstances under which he believes that doing an action would be conducive to making pi an irrational number. So it's not so much the case that he knows that the problem isn't that he knows he's unable to do anything to bring it about that pi is an irrational number. The issue is that if he did believe that doing something would bring it about that pi is a rational number, then Pythagoras is disposed to doing that thing. So it still can fit into this model. What matters only is whether Pythagoras would do this particular action, everything else being equal, if he came to form some thought. And there doesn't seem to be a reason why he couldn't, right? So Pythagoras should not be described as having a desire, but because he can't do those particular things, right? So he doesn't seem to have it as a desire. But assuming that he has one, there's no reason to think that he would fail to have D1 at that moment. So they think that D1 is true, right? So if you don't have if you're not disposed to doing something that you think is conducive to bringing it about, that you obtain your desire, the object, then you don't have the desire. And while Pythagoras does not have the desire because he's not disposed to bringing it about, if he did have the desire, then he would have meet D1. So there's another objection from Schroeder that they have in the footnotes. And they say, suppose I desire that, and they're quoting Schroeder here, suppose I desire that a committee make up in its mind in my favor without my intervention. This is a state of affairs that I want very much, yet because of the very nature of the desire, it makes no sense to try to act to satisfy it. What I want is that the committee make a certain decision without my needing to do anything. So what would Eckert and Dorian say to Schroeder in this case? This is something I want you to think about. And what could Eckert and Dorian say to Schroeder's example? Because the thing is that what you can find this footnote and see what they do say, in fact. But think about what they could say, right? Could they say that this actually isn't a desire because there's nothing you can do to make it happen? Because the constraints that Schroeder puts on there are that you want the committee to make a decision in your favor, but you don't want to interfere in any way. So maybe, what do you think they would call it something else besides the desire? And what is this a desire or is this something else? If it is a desire, why is it a desire? So you need to kind of think about those types of things. The response to Strawson, now, about the weather watchers is to construct a different type of explanation for the weather watchers. They say, suppose that Wendy, the weather watcher, has a very strong cognitive attitude toward there being a snow shower. In fact, this is the only positive cognitive attitude she has, and she feels adverse to there being a rain shower. Now, Wendy now has a disposition to make herself visually imagine a snow shower in circumstances where she thinks her imagining a snow shower is conducive to there being a snow shower, and she is capable of making herself imagine something. So they say why this seems to be relevant because for two reasons. Because you can get a kind of an interesting result from setting up these imaginary circumstances. So if you make in logic, if you make of a conditional statement, if you make the antecedent false, the conditional statement will always be true. but it's not true in any sort of informative way. It's trivially true. So they say, imagine this case, W1. If Wendy were to think that her imagining a snow shower is conducive to there being a snow shower, and if she was capable of making herself imagine something, she would make herself imagine a snow shower, everything else being equal. Contrast this with this other case. If Wendy were to think that her imagining a snow shower is conducive to there being a rain shower, and if she were capable of making herself imagine something, she would make herself imagine have a rain shower, everything else being equal. The thing is that the first one, W1, is true and number 2 is false. So these cognitive attitudes, the cognitive attitude that having imagined a snow shower, right? She wants there to be a snow shower. This implies that W1 is true and that W2 is false. And so it implies that if there's something she could do, then she would go ahead and do that thing. So when he doesn't have a desire, they say, because there's another necessary condition, another condition that she doesn't meet, right? So now they introduce their second constraint on desire, D2. And D2 goes something like this. For any agent A, any proposition P, anytime T, if at T A desires that P, then there is at least one act type phi such that at T A does not think her phi not to be conducive to P's being the case. So D2 rules out that you can desire that P while thinking that there's nothing you could do in any possible situation that would be conducive to P's being the case. So let's translate D2. So if at 1 o'clock I have a desire for coffee, then there's at least one action type walking toward the coffee shop, such that at 1 o'clock I do not think that walking to the coffee shop is not conducive to having coffee. So if I want P, if I desire to have coffee, then for any action type, so imagine, getting my wallet, for example, I don't think that getting my wallet is not going to be conducive to P's being the case if I'm disposed to doing that types of things. So this is why D2 rules out the possibility that if I desire that P, I also am going to be thinking that there is something I can do uh, to bring about that P. So that's this constraint. This constraint is that there has to be something I can do. If I actually desire D2, then I do believe that there's something that I can do to bring about D2, or bring about the desired object. Claim that you might be not sure what action or if any action on your part could contribute to bringing about what you want. They do want to say that you cannot be completely clear that nothing you do would bring about a contribution to your achieving the end. And they think that D2 captures the familiar idea that the object of desire must be taken by the person who has it to be attainable in a sense of being a possible future outcome. So I think it has to be a possible future outcome in order for it to be desired. Ecker and Dorian bring up their third criterion, D3, and they say for any agent A, any proposition P at time T, if at T A desires that P, then at T A does not think P is already the case. So for example, if at 1 o'clock I want a cup of coffee, then at 1 o'clock I do not think that I already have a cup of coffee. Right? So nothing. So this case is what they're actually talking about here is pretty clear that if I want something, it can't be the case that I already have that thing. It might be the case that I want to continue to have that thing, right? I might want to continue to have a cup of coffee, But that's different, they claim, from having a cup of coffee. So if I want to drink a cup of coffee, then it can't be the case that I am drinking the cup of coffee, because then my desire is being satisfied. And so when I have the cup of coffee, then my desire goes away. They call it the death of desire. So I meet my desire has been satisfied. Now I no longer have the disposition to bring it about. Um, well, actually, I still have the disposition to bring it about, that I get that thing, but I don't have the correct manifestation conditions anymore, that aren't required. They're not required at this point. So the conditions for desire, the necessary conditions, are three for Eckert-Doreen. They say if you have a desire, then any act type phi if at t, A desires at p when A is disposed at t to phi in circumstances where A takes phi to be conducive to p's being the case. So, for example, if at 1 o'clock I desire to have a cup of coffee, then I am disposed at 1 o'clock to do things that will bring about the case where I take those particular things to be conducive to getting a cup of coffee. For example, if at 1 o'clock I desire that I have a cup of coffee, then I am disposed at 1 o'clock to grab my wallet and walk to the coffee shop, because I take grabbing my wallet and walking to the coffee shop to be conducive to getting a cup of coffee. If I have a desire, then D2 is true, they claim. They say, if I have a desire, then at 1 o'clock I desire that I have a cup of coffee, then there's at least one act type, picking up my wallet, such that at 1 o'clock I do not think that picking up my wallet isn't conducive to getting a cup of coffee. So what they're claiming here is that there has to be something that I can do to bring about getting a cup of coffee. That's what they're thinking. Now they have if number three. If I have a desire, then if at 1 o'clock I desire to have a cup of coffee, then at 1 o'clock I do not already think that I have the cup of coffee. So all these things must be true, they claim, in order to have the desire. And these are necessary conditions. So if you want to argue against Eckert-Doreen, all you'd have to do is show that one of these D1 through D3 are false, and that would negate the modus ponens. So if the modus ponens goes like this, if D1 is, if you have a desire, then D1 and D2 and D3 are true. That's the modus ponens. That's the first premise. Premise number 2 was I have a desire. Premise number 3 is therefore I have D1, D2, and D3. So if one of these wasn't correct, then you could say if you have a desire, then you have D1, D2, and D3. And the premise 2 could be something like I don't have D2. Say therefore I do not have a desire. The thing is, if you can show that you do have a desire, even though D2 or D3 or D1 doesn't hold, then what you've shown is that the first premise, premise 1, if I have a desire, then D1 and D2 and D3 are true. You've shown that that premise is false. So that's what you can do. You can construct some sort of thought experiment to show that this doesn't hold. And their insistence that your thought experiment doesn't meet one of these three conditions wouldn't work as a reply to you, because it would beg the question against your thought experiment. They'd have to come at it some other way. Your whole point of the thought experiment would be to show that these conditions can fail to be met and you can still have desires.